Good evening, honoured guests, life members, delegates and comrades. Happy 100th birthday. 100 years of history is looking down on us tonight. Firstly, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to thank everyone who is here today for your contribution to our great union, the Finance Sector Union of Australia, the longest operating standalone union in the world for finance workers. I want to acknowledge the work and dedication of the former FSU office bearers in the audience tonight. We are all custodians for a short time, but the union lives forever. Our union was founded in the wake of World War I in 1919 for the same reasons that trade unions have always been set up: to improve wages and conditions of members, to build power in the workplace, and to give people a better life. The founders met in secret as banks worked hard to put down previous attempts to form the Bank Employees Union. And bank workers worked long hours without being compensated. Today we call that wage theft. They did not receive adequate allowance. They were moved along with their families at short notice. The more things changed, the more things stayed the same. The Melbourne Argus, now The Age, reported that on October 7, 1919, the Bank Officials Association had been formed and was seeking registration under the Conciliation and Arbitration Act. The paper also mentioned that there was a proposal that the minimum wage for adult workers be £4, a rate to apply to both men and women. Although there may have been pay parity amongst male and female bank clerks, this wage solidarity did not extend to all positions. And today we call that the gender pay gap. There were no women in positions of leadership. Fast forward to 2019, and there are 4 out of 7 leadership positions across the country. I wonder what a union official from 1919 would make of 2019. Yes, so much has been gained, but would they still see Conservative governments and their business boosters pursue and harass the labour movement? They would recognise globalisation as colonisation. Capital has always been transnational. The fledgling union movement of the time went on to endure a Great Depression and another World War, and then saw its best days in terms of power, influence and membership. Are our best days in front of us, friends? Their causes are still our causes now. The most obvious difference they would see is the prominent role of women in our movement. However, we know that women have always played a major role in the development of organised labour, even though their contribution may have been written out, moved to the margins, or our significance played down. I acknowledge Sally McManus here tonight with us, the first woman to hold the office at the ACTU as Secretary in its history, and I'm only the second FSU National Secretary in our 100 years. I can say with certainty that we won't be the last, and that the next 100 years will see leadership that reflects the diverse communities, because the future of our movement depends on this. We like to say at the FSU that we work at the pointy end of capitalism. I look at Jeff because that was his favourite phase. It's worthwhile remembering, people, that the Finance Sector Union have been telling the banks, the media, politicians and anyone else who would listen that the culture in too many of our financial institutions was utterly toxic, and we've been saying that for years. The FSU was calling for the Banking Royal Commission before it became fashionable. We'd heard the stories, we'd seen the reality, and we'd dealt with the impact on our members. And whilst the Banking Royal Commission highlighted these practices, it's fair to say that the recommendations arising from the Commission were a disappointment. If anyone doubts this, they should note that the share price of the Big Four banks went up when the recommendations were released. In most other sectors of the economy, an excoriating Royal Commission would be followed by a period of reflection and reform as the industry sought to restore trust and position itself for the future. 2019 has been a tough year for our side of politics, and we all know what happened, and I'm not going to pore over the entrails of the ALP defeat tonight. But one of the things I would like to reflect on, though, is when I hear or read things like nostalgia for the 1970s is a bit passé. I think, oh, for the days of 60% union density, a single trading authority. Those things don't sound too bad to me. The post-World War II consensus gave way to market fundamentalism. But things are swinging back, friends. When neoliberal organisations like the IMF are saying that we may have got it wrong, that perhaps we went too hard, the thinking is starting to change. When investment bankers are saying that the leader of the UK Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, is more stable than the Conservatives, then things are starting to change. The American Labour leader Eugene Debs said this: 10,000 times has the Labour movement stumbled and fallen and bruised itself, and it's risen again, been seized by the throat and choked and clubbed into insensibility, enjoined by courts, assaulted by thugs, traduced by peers, frowned upon by public opinion, deceived by politicians, deserted by cowards, bled by leeches, and sold out by leaders. But notwithstanding all of this, it is today the most vital and powerful power this planet has ever known. And its historic mission of emancipating workers of the world is as certain as the ultimate realisation as it is the setting of the sun. He said that 100 years ago, and that is my hope and my message for tonight. The labour movement is still the most powerful and vital power this planet has ever known. And that is why we must reclaim some of the language of our opponents. How will we let them outflank us on aspiration? The desire for a better life and to lift the living standards of all workers and their families is in our DNA, in the DNA of our movement. John Falzone, the former CEO of St Vincent de Paul, encapsulates this idea in a recent essay on aspiration. He says, perhaps unions, and indeed progressive grassroots social movements in general, are hated by neoliberal governments today precisely because they are the vehicle for collective aspiration, historically showing that the real improvements to the lives of ordinary people come when they fight, and they fight collectively. Rather than limiting aspiration, which is a common neoliberal claim, unions organise aspiration. The aspiration for better pay and conditions, health and safety regulation, paid leave for when you're sick, when you need to care for someone you love, when you're having a child, when you need to deal with gendered violence, or when you need an annual break. Aspiration is about having a better vision for a better society. And we are at our best when we are offering people to be part of something bigger, a collective entity that provides solutions to their struggles of their everyday lives. So we shape the future by acknowledging the past. And it was the Labour side that built the post-World War II settlement, that ushered in the modern era in 1972, that took on the difficult but necessary task of restructuring their economy in 1983, who apologised to the original inhabitants, and who shielded us from the Great Recession in 2007. We achieved these things by offering something distinctively Labour. One of our most famous, if not famous, speeches on our side, The Light on the Hill. It defined aspiration for all time when Ben Chifley said, "We have a great objective, the light on the hill, which we aim to reach by working the betterment of mankind, not only here but anywhere we may give a helping hand. If it were not for that, the labour movement would not be worth fighting for. If the movement can make someone more comfortable, to give some father or some mother a greater feeling of security for their children, a feeling that if a depression comes, there will be work, that the government is striving its hardest to do its best, then the labour movement is completely justified." So in 100 years' time, when the leadership of our union is celebrating its bicentennial, how will they reflect on 2019? How will we be remembered? I know we don't do these things for ego, but I think legacy is important all the same. And like the American civil rights activist Dorothy Height, I want to be remembered as someone who used herself and anything she could touch to work for justice and freedom. I want to be remembered as someone who tried. I want to have inspired my daughters and their daughters. And I want to be remembered as someone who did not accept the things I could not change, because I tried to change the things I could not accept. Delegates, I thank you so much for your presence here tonight. It really means a lot to me and to my leadership team. Thank you, and here's to the next 100 years of the mighty finance sector.